Yes.
Dr. Mulholland, I've just got 3 questions, and they address various different things from our earlier discussion. This morning, with the panel who gave evidence, it was discussed whether there should be a requirement on GPs to test people for hepatitis C on a while you're there basis, so much like blood pressure and diabetes. What would be the issues in terms of funding and staffing that would arise were such a requirement imposed?
I think the staffing is the biggest challenge. GPs run as independent businesses. We have a staff ratio that allows us to do the work that we know that we have. Anything we add in addition to that means that the same people are doing this, an additional job rather than anything else. They're probably reducing the work they're doing in some other area. So I think who would do this work if there's additional blood tests? Because it won't be while you're there, it will be at another appointment that you get your blood taken, usually by a phlebotomy team. So it really is around the workforce and how that would be fitted into whatever is the overstretched workload problem we have in general practice already.
Do you think it would be valuable for GPs to have specific training on the issue of infected blood?
That's a difficult question because every disease would be good for us all to have specific training on. And as part of the professional process of CPD, it's self-driven. Knowing everything about everything is impossible. And there will be always diseases that a GP or many GPs will not know everything about. So specific training is probably very hard to work out who needs it, how to deliver it, where it would go to, and what benefit it would actually make to the patients. I think general training or general information and information sharing both to doctors and to the public that you may have had a transfusion in the past. If you've not discussed this with your doctor, please discuss it with them at some point. Is probably a more useful way of the people that are affected by it to come forward, because while you're with a patient coming to see a GP about a specific problem may only still deal with that specific problem while they're there because that's the priority that moment. How you would then, what the extra training would achieve may not be as useful as having more information generally that infected blood was a source of HCV.
And finally, do you think there's a risk that because previously GPs might have thought that everyone infected through infected blood would be identified in the look back, then even now that might result in barriers to identifying people with hepatitis C who haven't yet been diagnosed?
I think identifying people that haven't been diagnosed is always challenging. Both patients will need to know that they've had transfusion and come forward from that side. Just GPs being aware. I think these days people are more aware, certainly with the inquiry being in the news and hearing so much about it over the past years, that we know there are patients still coming forward who are being diagnosed now. I saw in some of the footage of the inquiry 30 years later for the first time this year. And I think 40 years, GPs are aware of that. Our doctors are increasingly aware. There could be more information shared that the look back wasn't as effective as might have been imagined.
So I have no further questions. Do you have anything you would like to ask?
Yes, I do. Very early on in your evidence, you were talking about CPD, and you told us that a lot of GPs may choose to go to an independent provider, and that the college had no control over the independent provider. You will know, as we all do, I think, that if you go onto the internet and look at something which is related to healthcare, you will get, how can I put this? You'll get a number of websites which are more reliable than others, which are certainly less reliable. Yeah. And some of the less reliable ones may be thought to have more commercial influence than others. Yeah. You're nodding. Is there any process, or have you thought of any process, by which the CPD course offered by an external provider is validated or approved at least as to the curriculum and content, generally speaking, by the college?
The college hasn't been involved in that because we work at providing that curriculum and content for our own CPD. I know that other CPD companies take it as seriously as we do in their own way. And probably within general practice, although there are many things on the web that you could go to look at, there are a number of companies that run very effective courses and up to date based on nice guidance. And I think increasingly nice guidance is used as the standard we all hold our CPD to. So if someone is teaching outside what NICE or SIGN in Scotland are saying, people would question where the evidence is coming from. So I think doctors and scientists are looking for evidence-based courses and evidence-based information. But as a college, we haven't tried to get involved in the quality of other people's work.
The reason I ask in particular is that in certain professions, and I'm thinking of the bar in this, amongst others, which I obviously have had experience of, my understanding is that the CPD courses, or courses which are offered by the person who takes them as part of their CPD, are actually approved as having so many hours CPD by the in this case the Council of the Bar. Yeah. That's the case, is it not?
Not anymore, sir.
Not anymore, right?
No.
Well, it used to be the case.
It did.
We do provide, if a provider wants a course accredited by us, we do offer that as a service from the college, and that would then be a stamp from the college, a kite mark effectively to say, this is our CGP recognised standard of information you're about to get. But that's very much a choice for the provider to make, not that we go looking for it or insist on it.
Yes, thank you. The second is this, again, it's relating to education. What we've heard a lot of, we've heard quite a bit of it today, and you yourself have been frank about the demands upon a GP's time. Being a GP in these days, we were told in very clear terms by this morning's panel, involves a certain amount of stress, if you like, which has led to the general profile of the profession aging, people being less inclined to do it. And two things arise out of this. First is there any particular training available, whether it's CPD or general, for the GP themselves? They're one party to a conversation, after all, with a patient. In terms of their own resilience, their own how to deal with the stresses which they may experience in practice, particularly given the unpredictable demands that it may bring.
Increasingly with the workload and workforce pressures in general practice, and we know that the number of GPs, full-time equivalents, is falling over the past years, whilst the population and the demands have risen. We have 1.3 million consultations per day in general practice now, compared to about 1 million before the pandemic. That GPs are really struggling to maintain their resilience, as you say. So many, both the college and other CPD providers and local networks are working very hard to maintain GP well-being and health and resilience within that, with courses, with support. Unfortunately, what we see is GPs do the job. They work 12-hour days very often, but they do fewer of them to maintain the space in their lives and work-life balance to allow them to be able to do the full amount of work on the days when they're in. So we're seeing a knock-on in the profession that the GP numbers fall because the workforce, or the demands of the workload, are so high on the days they work. So very often people are concentrating, and we do it within our faculty structure in the college, provide courses on well-being and support and resilience for the GPs so they can actually learn skills as well as support to get through it.
May I ask, the job you do is voluntary, is it?
I'm paid a small amount for the sessions I do. So I work for the college as an officer. So in that role, I'm paid.
So in that role, you have time which is remunerated?
Yes.
Is that true of all those who sit on the council of the college?
No, as a council member, people do it voluntarily. So I was a council member for some years before I was an officer, and that's a voluntary role.
So they will be giving their time, which they can ill afford to give given the demands of practice, in order to deal with the general interests of the profession. This is maybe a difficult question for you to answer, but does that risk the quality of leadership being less strong than it used to be?
As a GP leader, it's a difficult question to answer, but I
well,
think
the word is risk. I'm not asking you to say, yes, that's the case, well, unless you think it is.
No, I think the quality of leadership we're seeing coming through, particularly from our younger members as well in the college, is as strong as it always has been. But people are now seeing that as part of their career and factoring the time required in their workload, but as a voluntary role. And so we have volunteers working in our faculties, we have volunteers working on various projects through the college on the assessment of evidence and other parts. And these people will see it as it helps balance some of the resilience from practice. If they're doing a different job for part of the week, even if it's as a volunteer, it helps to stimulate the brain, it keeps them interested in the work, rather than just having to constantly go through large amounts of work on a day in practice.
Thank you. And the next question again arises really out of this morning's exchanges in evidence. We were told that even though in Scotland it's now mandated that the discharge letter should refer to a blood transfusion, in about 50% of cases it doesn't. Right. Looking at the discharge letters you will have seen, and those in your practice have seen so far as you are aware, is it the case that it is probably 50% or less of those letters will refer to a transfusion which, so far as, again, depends on the information you've got about it, so far as you know, has or has most probably been given?
I think the number of discharge letters with blood transfusion on them is probably quite small, because most of my patients and elderly population are going in with medical problems that don't need transfusion. Sometimes they do. But the numbers that we're receiving are quite small numbers saying transfusion on them.
So the probability is that they're not recording all of them?
I don't know about the recording in hospital. I wouldn't want to guess what they record.
You can't know without.
No, can't know without
that. If as a matter of general practice you might expect a certain proportion of patients who've been in hospital for various conditions to have had transfusions, and if you're getting actually very few letters which say yes, they so-and-so had a transfusion of whatever, then chances are that some are not being recorded.
Possibly, yes.
Thank you. That's all that I ask.
Dr. Mulholland, is there anything else you would like to add?
May I make a statement?
Please do.
So good afternoon, everybody. Thank you. I'm Michael Mulholland, a GP in Buckinghamshire and Honorary Secretary of the Royal College of GPs. The RCGP is the largest medical Royal College, and it represents over 54,000 family doctors in the UK. Our mission since we were founded 70 years ago has always been to raise the standards of patient care. I've been asked by my college and coming here today to add to my evidence that we send our sympathy to everyone whose life has been impacted and to their families. Lessons must be learnt from the experience, and the college will play our part in preventing anything similar happening in future.
Well, thank you for that, and thank you for your evidence, particularly given what we've just been saying about the busyness of a GP's practice and role. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. So that concludes the evidence for today. Tomorrow we will be hearing from Professor Sir Jonathan Van Tam.
Yes, Professor Sir Jonathan Van Tam, tomorrow, 10 o'clock.